is 35 microns, contoured, as I said. It's quite a hard foil, but it is burnishable. You usually don't need to burnish it that much, if at all. I've mentioned sizes. I've got a note here about, I've had a number of people who've used it on a class 2, maybe a large class 2, and they crumple the band when they're forcing it through the tight contact. And my recommendation in that situation is that you put the wedge that you're going to use through the intact side of the tooth that you're restoring, and that opens up the contact. I mean, you can do that during the while you're prepping the tooth, and then the tooth will move a little bit. It doesn't have to move far, only 35 microns, and then you can slide the band in, and then you can use the same wedge on the restoration side. So we've developed for this product 2 types. So there's the regular, which looks like on the left, and the tabbed, which is on the right. And I'll explain a bit more about what these tabs are about. Here's a video of what the band looks like. So here you can see the swivel in operation. It's easy just to switch that over to the side you're working on, and you push that on, and then when you wind it, reduces the circumference of the band, and you can unwind it and pull it out like any other band. And here, this is all quite straightforward. Winding it up, I mean, I tend to, when I'm doing that, using my middle finger to hold the band down and my first finger and thumb to hold the carrier. We've had a few people who left the carrier on during the restoration have complained that the carrier's heavy. Well, the whole idea of the carrier is that you detach it. So that's very straightforward. Now, I'd just like to talk a little bit about why do we get open contacts? And as you probably have all experienced this, it can be very frustrating, especially when you're running late, or you definitely end up running late when you create an open contact. And so we routinely check our contacts at the end with floss. And I was pondering about why do we get this problem? And I thought to myself, I wonder how thick dental floss is, because I'd never actually, nobody had ever told me, and I hadn't ever measured it. So I got, well, I actually got some very accurate micrometer out, and also got these vernier gauge ones. But I was a bit surprised that many types of floss is 100 microns, or some of it's around about 65. But I started to think to myself, hang on, if floss goes through and it's 100 microns, that means that's an open contact. But the foil is only 35 microns. There's another 65 microns of air in there. So what that means is that if I created an open contact, to me, that means that the matrix band wasn't touching, it wasn't to do with separation. It was that because the separation, the foil is only 35 microns. Now, I'll just show you a bit more what I mean. And my thinking went along this lines of thought. So I thought to myself, why don't I try and create a restoration where there's only the thickness of the foil, which is 35 microns, and see if I get a click with floss. So, and you can try this yourself. So I placed a matrix band, no wedging. I just passively placed it there, and I wanted it to stay put. So I actually just used some flowable to glue it to the adjacent tooth. And then without a wedge, I just passively placed some composite in that restoration. And what happened was, so when I tested it with floss, I got a click. So that kind of proved that if you end up with a 35 micron gap, you do actually get a click with floss, and it was quite a good click. And this was rather a revelation to me, especially since one of the main products I'd developed was the V3 ring, which was the whole idea of that was to cause separation. But anyway, we all know that if you in the olden days, in the early days when everybody was using Tofflemire and trying to use composites, we quite often got an okay contacts with just a wedge. So we know that's a possibility. So that's very interesting. So what that means is that if you do get a bad contact, what's happened is that the band has somehow moved away from the neighboring tooth. And as you know, the visibility is very restricted. It's very difficult to see that that's happened. But you didn't notice, and away you went and you restored the tooth and took the band off, and oh no, disaster, I've got an open contact. Now, how thick is 35 microns? And I've measured a few things with a very accurate micrometer, and this is a female dental assistant's back of the hand, and those hairs on the back of her hand, those really fine hairs, are 35 microns, and it's hard to comprehend that the foil that we're using is that thin, but it actually is. It's amazingly strong. Now, I'm just going to show you a video of now here I'm going to cover this wedge a bit more later, but I want to be able to pause this. But one thing that you can do yourself is I'll just pause that there. So what we did here was before we did the restoration, the local anesthetic went in and we placed a wedge, and then we just got a piece of matrix foil and we used it like a feeler gauge to see whether it would fit in. And oh, that's gone wrong. I have to come back to here. Let me just go back to there. So and you can try this yourself. This foil just slides through with a wedge, which means we have separated more than 35 microns. Now, another thing to think about is when we use a wedge or any other method to separate teeth, what's going on is the forces are equal and opposite. So when you think about it, the forces are, oh no, I've just messed that up again. Come back to here. I pressed the wrong button and go wrong way. Let me just pause that. Where's the mouse? Oh, I'm having mouse issues here. I'm going to go back up. Sorry about this, everybody. It's my controls disappear. But anyway, I can pause that and let it go a bit more to the point I want to. Oh, it's doing it again. Can I get to the right place and start? Anyway, it's not. I don't think it. My point is that, I don't know if you can see the mouse, is that the teeth are being pushed apart, and as a consequence, the matrix is actually moving away from the neighboring tooth. The wedging is literally pushing the teeth apart like that. So by wedging, you are moving your matrix away from the adjacent tooth. And we have all been taught that the way to overcome that problem is to push on the matrix while there's a bit of composite in the proximal box and light cure it. Probably everybody does that. And what I might do here is so the pushing process is all very well, and I did that for years and years and years. But I had a number of issues with it. Sometimes I quite often got even though I tried to get a flat contact, you know, often with molars, the contact you want is quite a broad contact, and I ended up with a point contact, and then you end up with food packing, you know, palatally or say lingually, and that's annoying. Another time, I'm pretty sure when I used an instrument to hold it and I cured the flowable, I didn't really get a very nice shape. And then another time I used the Pro Contact Pro, that blue plastic instrument, which I thought was a good idea. And I used that for quite a long time with quite good success, until one day I got the instrument stuck into the restoration. Must have put a little bit too much composite in there. I don't think I did really. Or maybe the surface of the Contact Pro had got slightly roughened after a while, and I couldn't get it out. I could let it go, and it was just sticking out of the patient's mouth. So then I did what could I do? I tried wiggling it, and it just wouldn't budge. And I wiggled it a bit more, and it still wouldn't budge. So I thought, oh, this is bad. So I had to use a bit more force, and I heard a crack sound, and that was the composite in my restoration cracking. So I had no alternative if I was going to do a good job, but to start over and remove all the composite from the cavity and start all over again. And I threw away the Contact Pro at that point. Sometimes I also used a ball burnisher, and that's very easy to get that stuck. So there's a number of issues with that. And when you think about it, if you want to move something, you've only got two choices. One is to push it, or the other one is to pull it. So instead of pushing, what about pulling? And that's where the tabs come in. So let's have a look at how the things you can do with these tabs. So there's a number of tabs there because each tooth's a different circumference. And if you only had two tabs, you'd be pretty lucky if they ended up in exactly the right place. But by having 3 on each side, you end up with at least one that is, and now if I can pause this, which is challenging. No, I'm going to have this trouble, aren't I? Not being able to pause. I wonder if that, oh, I can use a space button, that's the one. So I'll just go back to there, and I'll pause it so I can cover it off. So this clinical example assumes that we've acid etched the cavity. And okay, so now I've got some bond in that. Now I didn't really need to do the bond on the premolar. If I can pause it, yeah, it's the space bar that's going to solve my problem. So I put some bond on the tooth behind the distal tooth under the tab, and then I didn't etch it. That would be a bad idea. You don't want to etch that surface, but if you only put bond on and then you put some regular flowable, you can now bond that tab to the adjacent tooth. And it takes hardly any extra time, because when you light cure that flowable that's on the tab, you're also light curing the cavity. And I found it's quite good to put a reasonable amount on. And even if it's a ceramic restoration, the bond and the flowable seems to bond well enough, because it's only a temporary bond if we want. And you wiggle that out. Now on the mesial side, I'm not going to bond the tab. I'm just going to pull. And so I pull it and I cure the mesial. And now one of the benefits, I'm just going to pause here. So now an interesting benefit of this technique is that you can layer and build up both the mesial and the distal proximal box simultaneously, because the distal matrix band is glued to that tooth behind. So you don't have to worry about that. And the mesial one, you're pulling on the tab. You can glue them both down if you want, but I don't think it's necessary. I think you just have to do one because you can pull on the other. So that's really a big time saver. And if you watch there, I don't know if you actually saw the composite in the mesial actually moved with the matrix. Now, what's also very cool is depending on how hard you pull, you can modify the shape of your interproximal contact. So if you want a point contact, then you don't pull very hard. If you want a broad contact, you pull harder. And if you want a really broad contact, then you can potentially bond two of the tabs down. If they're in the way, I can't see that there are many times when they're in the way. And you can also use the tabless regular band, but to me, I like this approach. So we'll just cure that, and obviously we cured it for longer, and reconnect the carrier, unscrew it, and remove the band. I like to make sure the band is debonded before I try and pull it out. Often I'll put a probe through underneath because our dental bonding agents are phenomenal and they stick to stainless steel. So if you don't debond and you just yank on the band, you're going to rip it off. Now you can use a scaler or some instrument to get rid of that temporary blowable that's on that tooth behind. And as you can see, I'm struggling to get that out because it's got such tight contacts. And you can see I deliberately made extra wide contacts there. So I mean, I probably would argue that mesial contact is probably too flat, but that was done deliberately so you can see what you can do and how much extra control that you get if you use this technique. And someone showed me how you can use that number 12 just to quickly tidy up the restoration. Now you've got very little finish.